What's up, everybody? Michael Johnson here with Backstage Choreo Live. I'm excited to be here with you again today to talk a little bit more, of course, about systems. If you haven't joined us on any of our lives, we talk a lot about business systems, personal systems, any kind of systems that can affect you in your business and in your life. And today we are going to talk about something that I call systems drift and why good systems quietly stop working. That's something that's a pretty big deal. And I want to address it because we've been talking a lot about systems in regards to some of the basic systems that go with the E7S framework that we've talked about, which is the essential 7 systems that you need for your business. And we've gone through and we've started to talk about some of those basics, the basic composition of some systems that you need in place. Now, those basics are by no means comprehensive, right? Because there's hundreds of systems that would actually live within each of those E7S systems. And what we want to talk about today is a little bit more on the choreography layer. We call that the TCL framework. And again, if you haven't been with me or been seeing this very much, let me show you. This is the TCL framework. It's signified by the double layered omega, showing that there's choreography layered on top of choreography. And that's why it's called the choreography layer, right? There's a lot of pieces and parts on how all of your choreography of your systems kind of interact and work together. And that's kind of the end, right? The end. That's why we used the double layer omega to signify this framework. So we're going to talk today a little bit, or we're going to talk about and demonstrate is a principle inside choreography. And that principle is really dictated by this thing called systems drift, or drifting, as it were. Now, there's lots of ways to talk about this, but a couple things I want to share with you, right? And why we want to discuss this today. It's because so many businesses actually don't fail because they don't have systems. They actually fail because they start drifting away from what the original design was. Now, this happens in every venue, right? And I noticed it early on in my dancing days. We'd get choreography and then it would just start to drift and it would work. And I remember so many times dancers coming to me that I did choreography for. And I remember going to my coaches or my choreographers and saying, hey, this worked when you gave it to me, but it doesn't work now. And that's because it slowly drifted away from the original design. But here's the thing, drift doesn't actually come from bad decisions that are made. And I think that's kind of the thing that a lot of people look at, is they think of it in terms of bad decisions that were made. But what actually happens is it starts to come from reasonable and well-intentioned, well-meaning shortcuts that were taken, or maybe omissions, or something that the people building the system or executing the system thought, well, I'm just going to do this because it's a little faster. But here's the thing, the blueprint didn't change. What actually did change was the execution changed. So let me tell you a little story. This is really, really cool. So hang with me. I'll keep it brief. In the early 1970s, there was this company, and you know the company, it still exists today, Citicorp, and they wanted to build a skyscraper in New York City, you know, because that's what you do in New York City, right? And the site that they chose had a church on it. It was St. Peter's Lutheran Church. And they refused to relocate. So, you know, to make a long story shorter, they made an agreement with that church to remain on that spot, on the corner of that lot that they wanted to build on, as long as the skyscraper would be built around it. Think about that. I mean, can you envision that in your mind? That's a little crazy, right? So that building that they decided to ultimately build it became what was called the Citigroup Center, right? And it's a really, really cool building. I'll show you a picture of it here in a second. And this was a building that was designed by a really famous architect, especially now. His name is Hugh Stubbins. That structural engineering for that design was by a guy named William Le Mesurier. I don't know if I said that properly. Anyway, that building was completed in 1977. And the unique feature of this building was that the tower was elevated on 4 massive columns positioned mid-side rather than at the corners, right? So normally you would see that at the corners. Now, so it was on stilts, but it was positioned mid-side. It's hard to even imagine what this was looking like, right? This was a total deliberate design choice, right? This is how the architect made it to preserve the church and the plaza below. And that was part of the agreement, right? Now, before I tell you the remainder of the story, let me show you this. So I'm going to show you, here's a picture of this. So if you haven't seen it, now I lived in New York City, New Jersey for about 10 years during my competitive dance days. So this building is really cool, right? And if you haven't seen it, it's quite the spectacle, right? Now this picture kind of shows you a little bit of the spectacle of it, but I want to show you the next picture. Now I'm going to just kind of zoom that in just a little bit, but take a look at that. Look at what's happening here. There's a building here, and this skyscraper above it, right, which we kind of showed how big that is above it, is kind of hovering over the street and over these people. And how cool is that, right? Like what an incredible piece of design. What an incredible piece of choreography that was made here. Like it blows me away, right? So anyway, I want you to keep that in mind as I tell you about the next part, right, of the story. The next part of the story goes like this. This is crazy, right? Like, does this stuff really happen? Yeah, it really happens. It just blows me away. Okay, so I don't want to get it wrong here. I'm pulling up my notes. So the original structure design specified fully welded joints in all the critical branching connections. Right, that's what the design, the blueprint said, right? But during construction, there were bolted joints that were substituted instead. Right, now think about that. They were supposed to be fully welded, and they chose bolted joints instead. Okay, seems like a harmless change. This was seen at the time as acceptable and efficient, and they were like, what's the big deal, right? But the original designer, the original engineer, and the person who made the blueprints was not consulted before that change. It's because it was considered acceptable. Like, what's the big deal, right? But after completion, later on down the road, and this is the story, who knows, like they have a hard time proving this, but the theory is that a Princeton engineering student questioned how the building handled quartering winds. Right? Quartering winds is the winds hitting the building diagonally, right? And that question revealed the bolted joints actually reduced structural safety under rare but totally possible winds that could come through New York City. So in essence, the building wasn't wrong, and it wasn't actually built wrong, but the engineer and architect went back and looked at it, and it had, because of that one little harmless, innocent change, we're going to call it drift, it had drifted from the original choreography, but just by a little bit, right? But what they found out was that was bad news, and that whole building could have toppled over in the right circumstances of wind. Now, here's the thing. The structure ultimately was retrofitted really quietly. There's a whole conspiracy about that, and you can go look it up and read about it or whatever. That's not what this is about, right? But they quietly went back in and they retrofitted the building with the welded steel plates, and they got it to be all perfect and safe, right? Of course, they did that really silently, and it was a big thing, right? And it's still standing today, really cool. I've seen it in person. It's a very cool thing, right? But look, this building didn't fail, right? And it certainly didn't fail because it lacked a design. It could have, in the wrong circumstances, had some things gone really wrong. But it was put at risk because during the building of it, the execution drifted without anyone rechecking the design. And I want you to think about that little drift. And it was an innocent, harmless drift. And I thought, yeah, what's the big deal, right? It's going to do the same thing. We're going to put bolts instead of welding it. No big deal, right? Okay, so here's the thing. We want to look at this in our business because this happens constantly in business systems. In fact, I see more of them than I talk about because I can't tell everybody all the ones that I see, right? It's too overwhelming. But it happens constantly in business. And it's certainly not from neglect. It's not because anybody was a bad person. Just like in that story, nobody was a bad person. Nobody was doing it with malintent, and certainly not doing it maliciously, right? But they made some decisions that would affect thousands of people's lives, and that was no good, right? In business, what happens is that drift starts to happen, and it usually comes from statements like, "Oh, well, we'll just add that later. Oh, you know what? We'll just put that in later." And those little decisions of, "Oh, we'll just do it later." Yeah, oh yeah, I know we're supposed to do that. And I know that the choreography says that. I know the map shows me to do that, but we'll just do it later, right? Because it's not that important right now. So what I want to do today is I want to show you what that looks like in one of the simple systems that we've built. So if you've been following along with the lives and watching along, one of the early basic systems that we did was a attraction choreography system. And all we did was we built a basic lead magnet. Let me pull that up actually, because you guys have seen the systems board. So we use this systems board to build, right? This is something I built just to help me be able to build these systems a little bit easier and get to the point a little quicker, right? So we're kind of living in this choreography layer. We're talking about drift, and that's a principle, and it kind of overlaps with flow and transition, right? But early on, we talked about, I'm just going to zoom this in here. We talked about attraction choreography systems, and we built a basic one. And this, oh, I haven't even added it to the stage. Why didn't y'all tell me that? Come on, I'm looking foolish here. All right, so not cool. Come on, guys. All right, so you look down. We're kind of talking about. Here's what I was saying earlier. We're kind of in this realm of the choreography layer. We're talking about a principle in choreography and flow and transition. It kind of has a little carryover, but we're really into talking about a principle here. Now, this is one of the early ones we did in the E7S systems, right? We were talking about an attraction choreography system, and we built a basic lead magnet system, as you can see here, right? There was the leads that we need to get from what channel, right? We sent them into a funnel that pushed a lead magnet of some sort. Once they came in, they went to the thank you page. The thank you page said, hey, check your email, because this automatically triggered an automation, which is that little triangle. And it started to send them a sequence. I call that sequence a consumption sequence. And the reason I call it a consumption sequence is because it is trying to convince the person who opted in for that lead magnet to consume the lead magnet. That in itself is golden, right? If you're not doing that first when somebody opts into one of your lead magnets, if you're not making it so that you have something that tries to convince them and assumes they're not going to utilize your lead magnet, but you're going to help them to utilize your lead magnet and do everything in your power to utilize the lead magnet, then you're already missing something. But we're just going to kind of go we're going to go based off of this idea right now that okay, you had this basic system, you built this basic lead magnet, but you'll notice there's this little arrow down here at the bottom, and the little arrow points to another automation. Okay, so that's what happens, right? They opt in, they go to the funnel, they go to the automation, the thank you page. There's a little automation here. They probably get tagged and segmented in your CRM, which hopefully you have. And then they go through the consumption sequence. Awesome. Then there's a little arrow here and it goes to another automation. What's the automation? Well, we also built that in another live, so you can go check that out. You can go back and look at that one if you want. And we built a nurture choreography system. Now, in many instances, there is also other systems that you can create. And one of the systems that you should have is a sales system, because this sequence might have turned them into a warm or hot buyer. And so you should have something that could ascend them to the next thing that you're selling in your business, the thing that makes the acquisition cost go away, right? And that, if you're really lucky, you have and lucky, I shouldn't say luck. Luck is labor under correct knowledge, right? But if you've created it well, your lead magnet is a break-even lead magnet, because then you're going to send them to a sequence, which I would call an upsell sequence. Now, that's where the plot thickens, because the choreography could show that. And the number of times I've told people to do that, and they shook their head at me and said, yes, Michael, we're going to do that. And then only to come back and find out that it took all sorts of energy and it took all sorts of time to get this built. And when it all came down to it, they skipped the upsell sequence. Now, that's not complex. Is it really complex to write an upsell sequence that would then push your potentially new customer towards the thing that is your core product? That sequence could be 8 emails long. It could be 42 emails long to give them the chance to naturally ascend to your core product. That's not hard, right? It's not a big deal. It's not complex. But here's the thing. That drift was intentional, and I see it all the time. What happens is they build the lead magnet. They're like, yeah, I totally know, Michael, that I should build an automation that automatically sends them to the upsell of my core product. And then they promptly proceed to skip it because they didn't have the bandwidth or the energy or whatever. That is what drift is. It's common, it's harmless, but it's real. And I see it over and over again, right? The consumption sequence exists, right? Because they were following it to the letter. But right here, I said, build an upsell sequence. We're not talking hard. We're not talking like rocket science. We're talking literally like some emails that upsell your core product, right? But they don't connect it. I've even seen it where they have the upsell sequence and they just don't connect it. It's understandable. Lots of energy. It takes lots of making sure that the people building it, whether it's yourself or whether it's somebody else, actually do the thing. But that's where everything goes wrong, right? The lead magnet goes to the consumption sequence. The consumption sequence ends, and then nothing happens. Nothing routes the contact to the upsell. Nothing gets them into, there's no decision logic made on what happens to that lead. And then it just maybe gets manually added later. Maybe. I mean, okay. Raise your hand if you've let some leads go cold in your life. Come on, just go ahead and do it. It's the walk of shame, right? Who hasn't let leads go cold, right? You got the lead, you did all the work, you put the energy in, and then after you got the lead, you just didn't do anything with it. Yeah, it happens. It happens. And I've done it. And if you haven't done it, well, Merry Christmas. You're ridiculously diligent, and I'm proud of you. Way to go. But most of us have done that before, right? But here's the thing. There's nothing broken here. It's just a small little deviation. It's just a bolt instead of a weld, right? You're like, hey, I did it. Bolt it tight. Let's go. But then when you look at what happens downstream of this moment, now all of a sudden you come back and, like I said, we've all done it, right? And I have had a mentor come to me and go, so tell me the customer journey. And I was like, okay, this happens, and then this happens, and then eventually we sell them our core product and blah, 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 right? And they're like, well, yeah, but tell me what happens right after they get the lead magnet. And I said, oh, well, I'm so proud, right? I did my consumption sequence, this guy right here. And they're like, that's great. What happens right after they're done with that consumption sequence? And I was like, well, you know, it wasn't on purpose. I knew that I wanted to sell them my core product, and I knew they were in my system, but I just didn't have that connected. Now, I didn't make that mistake, and I don't make that mistake very often, but it happens, right? And it's just understandable, right? But the downstream effects of it could be affecting your core offer. It could be affecting how many conversions you're getting. It could be the difference between a month where you're doing hundreds of thousands instead of thousands. That's huge. Right. And I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and they were telling me about the difference between their November and their December. And as we talked about it, they were like, yeah, well, I just made sure that I was doing this one thing, and I knew I should do it, and I knew I was supposed to have done it, but I just kind of forgot, and I lost energy, and I didn't do it. But then I connected it again for December, and December was amazing. And that's what happens, right? The system is going to work, right? This system by itself is going to work. And that's why there is the choreography layer, because the choreography layer forces us to talk about what happens in between here, because it's so easy to build a system, or it's so easy to build this other system. And it's also so easy to innocently not connect them. And that's where the drift starts to happen. That's where stress starts to come in. That's where chaos creeps in quietly, right? Systems drift. I mean, I hate to be over dramatic, but honestly, it's the silent killer, right? And that it's a silent killer that's bent on tearing your business apart. And I know that sounds so epic, right? But like, it's so true, right? It's this little innocent, tiny things that just kind of innocently creeps in and starts taking things to pieces, right? So here's the thing. This is systems drift, right? The blueprint we talked about didn't change. The execution of it changed a little bit at the end, right? And over time, if I just kept bringing in those leads, but I never connected them to my sales sequence, then I'm missing out on revenue. I'm taking up mental overhead, right? Because it's like stressing me out, like why the revenue isn't happening the way it's supposed to. And it leaves something unclear. Now, I've also seen this where you've had the map, you have the blueprint, and you go and have your team start to put it together, your VAs start to put it together, your trusted person that you're having build whatever the thing is, right? Whatever the map is. And they take liberties. I was helping another client today, and the liberty that was taken was the difference between a disqualified lead and a qualified lead. And they just didn't put the automation in correctly to show the disqualified lead as opposed to the qualified lead. And because of that, there were leads just absolutely going to the wrong place and causing massive amounts of hours of work to undo that one teeny little thing. And it was innocent because it was just like, well, it looks kind of like it's the same, but they weren't disqualifying the lead. And so all leads were booking appointments. Bad news, right? Whereas only the leads that were qualified were supposed to be allowed to book appointments. And that's the kind of little thing that happens. Okay, so here's the thing. Choreography, and we talk about systems a lot, right? The choreography of the systems and choreographing your systems isn't really about starting over. In fact, it almost rarely is. You're starting from where you're at. And usually when you start from where you're at, you're bringing your new set of EEI, right? Your experience, your expertise, your insight, you're bringing that to the table. And that's why when I worked with professional dancers, they would periodically redo their choreography. They might keep it for 4 or 5 years, but then they would have a transfer and they would take out the old things and re-choreograph the new things because they had drifted from their original choreography. They had drifted and they were making innocent changes, innocent adjustments. But then over time, those innocent adjustments ultimately ended up in a place where it just didn't work anymore. And so then they just scrapped it, redid it. Now, does that mean you have to scrap and redo your stuff in your business? No, that's crazy. In fact, the better my world championship and championship level dancers got, the longer they kept their choreography and the more we worked on just trying not to allow that choreography to drift, right? Now, drift is totally normal. This is a totally normal thing, right? It happens to everybody and you can't avoid it. And it just happens, right? And like I said, it happens innocently. But yes, you can ignore the fact that drift is happening. That's an option you have, but it's probably not a good idea, right? Anyway, good choreography doesn't prevent change. It makes sure that change stays aligned all the way through, right? And so that's why we have to choreograph this stuff out. That's why these maps are imperative, right? Look, if your systems feel heavier than they should, it may not be because they're wrong, it might just be because they've drifted. And drift is fixable. So I want you to think about that. I want you to take that to heart. I want you to just do a little reflection on where your systems are at. And you know, maybe you have all your systems in place. Maybe you haven't built all your systems and they're not all in place. Maybe you need to revisit your systems. Anyway, regardless, I want you to reflect on that. I want you to think about it because this is such a game changer. This is such a big deal when it comes to choreography. And whether it's choreography for a dancer, or whether it's choreography for business, or whether it's composing for an orchestra, it doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. Or an architect, as we talked about earlier, making the blueprints for a skyscraper, right? These little innocent things of drift, like bolts instead of welding, they make a difference. Not to the person putting in the bolt, but to the person that calculated the math of what the welding did, right? And those things have to be accounted for, right? Anyway, I wanted to share with you this concept of systems drift. And I think that it's super important for you to really think about and reflect on. As you start to head into this new year, take a look at even just one system, one thing that is running and it feels like it's okay, but there's something in your gut, right? We all talk about our gut instincts, but think about it. You have some gut instincts about some of the systems that you're running. And when you're feeling that, I want you to just kind of say, wait a second, let me take a look at that system and let's see if there's been some drift. If you need some help, let me know. Guys, I hope you learned a lot about systems drift. It was fun delving into the choreography layer and that framework just a little bit, because we oftentimes spend a lot more time in the E7S framework. So I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a lot today. And as usual, if you have questions, put them in the comments, and I'll get back to you. I do my best to answer all the questions that I see come in. For those of you already in the community and in my world, you can just send me your questions in the community or whatnot. If you don't know about the community, go join systemsforexperts.com. It's a community for small business owners that want to improve their systems. Really, anybody that wants to improve their systems. It's free. Don't worry, I'm not asking for money. Anyway, all right, guys. Until next time, I hope you keep working on your systems, and we'll see you next time on Backstage Choreo Live. Keep choreographing your business. Peace out.